So we'll take a second. Oh, they fixed it. Zoom was running super slow for a while, but welcome back, Inebri-art. This is your host, Andy. That scores one in the column for remembering to introduce myself, which I never do. But today I am joined by Kevin Eslinger, um, artist who I think I came across. Um, I must have tripped something in the Instagram, Facebook algorithm because like overnight, all of a sudden, every sponsored post I was seeing is from a different artist, and I'm like, oh, I can live with this. And
Oh,
so yeah, so I figured I'd reach out because I was digging your work, very pop culture, very horror. Like I feel like cut from the same kind of cloth that I am. I used to back in the day, I used to own a comic book shop, so I'm a
oh
big nerd
wow. What
myself.
years did you own the comic book shop?
Oh, phew. Okay. So my youngest was, oh man, was my youngest born? So I'm gonna say, try to remember. Yeah, I think they were born. So it's probably like 2001.
Oh wow, that's a good era.
Yeah. So it was
The
like
Greg
right.
Capullo over at Batman. So there's a bunch of
Yeah.
Batman
Uh,
issues on your shelf.
the
Uh,
Civil War was like going on.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So is that
Okay, I can
2001? Does that seem right?
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little bit later, I think, with Greg Capullo and the Joker story arc. But I think, the Civil War would have been about that
Yeah.
time period. I
Yeah. I
was
mean, so like we opened, then we were open for a few years. So,
I was working at McFarlane Toys in New Jersey around the same
oh,
time I had a comic book shop. So
oh, nice.
um, I was a toy designer at McFarlane Toys. So I'd draw drawings, but then I would go to the comic book shops and buy comic books too. So
Yeah.
I remember buying that Civil War story arc while I was working at McFarlane.
I
So
specifically remember that because at the time I didn't have a lot of, subscribers for Captain America, and there was the death of Captain America comic,
yeah,
and it
yeah.
was like, I don't know, I only had like maybe 10 copies come in, and all of a sudden everybody wanted it like overnight. And so you're trying to like reorder it, and of course it's sold out. But yeah, so that's why I remember that specifically. Umbrella Academy came out around the same
Yeah,
time.
right.
It came out as a free comic book day, um, kind of like a short comic. And I just remember there's a at the time a type of customer that would walk in, you'd be like, it's over there. They'd be like, how do you know what I want? I'm like, because you're like an emo girl in a comic book shop. What else would you be here for?
Before I get it. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, that had a huge impact. Like just that whole like I was born in 1978, so like it feels like the perfect age to just be saturated or marinated in like pop culture because like everything came out with a consistent targeted advertising towards
Hmm.
kids like during the 80s. You know, I think it's what
Well, we
Mr.
had Saturday,
Rogers and
yeah, and we had Saturday
it's
morning
what Mr.
cartoons.
Rogers railed against.
Yeah.
Like it actually enacted itself in the 80s of just selling kind of flash and bang and advertisement and toys on television. And that heavily influenced my childhood and kind of heavily influenced what I wanted to do in life. So
Yep.
like I worked for Toys R Us when I was a teen. Well, before that, I got into baseball card collecting. So before the comic book collecting that I got into, I
Hmm.
was into baseball card collecting, and I started a company as like buying and reselling
Oh, sure.
baseball cards, like when I was
Yeah.
like probably 12 to 14.
Hmm.
And then I got into comic books after that, but I never resold the comic books. I was just really into the artwork, and that was right about when Todd McFarlane was doing his run on Spider-Man, and then switching over to Image Comics, and then I saw just going into comic book shops in the 90s, like how that whole thing played out from a fan perspective. And then I went to college. While I was in college, I also worked for I started working for a toy company called Gentle Giant Studios, and
Oh,
they were
sure.
just bringing
Yeah.
on 3D scanning at the time. So I was a toy designer. I started off as a prototype painter, and
Hmm.
then I started and I was going to Art Center College of Design at the same time in Southern California, and uh, and I just kind of like started off as a prototype painter and worked my way up to toy designer. And then I was working on the 3D technology that they had when they first brought it on, like the head scanning and the 3D printing and stuff. But then after I got out of college, I quit. I was quit that job a little bit before I got out of college, and then I moved. Eventually, found my way to McFarlane Toys, and uh, so my entire early adulthood and like teenage was really like the appreciation of art and comics, like going to college to learn how to do art at a very sophisticated level. I went to school as like an editorial illustrator. I
Yeah.
was really into like magazine illustrations and possibly doing at the time there wasn't a major for the film industry at Art Center,
Hmm.
but a lot of there wasn't like an entertainment design major, but a lot of people went into illustration thinking that they were going to storyboard for animation or for the movies. And
Yeah.
one of the biggest graduates from Art Center. Oh, yeah, there's many, but is Ralph McQuarrie, and he's the one that
Oh,
did all the
sure.
concept art
For Star
for
Wars. Yeah.
George Lucas, and
Yeah.
those hung on my wall. He had like a portfolio set that he produced, and
Yep.
they came out with these little 11 by, and I had those all over my wall when I was a kid, and so I didn't even know that I had chosen the school to go to that he went to. So it was kind of like a hap, and then I'd find out all these people that I admired their artwork technically when I was a kid, and I had actually chosen the right school to go to. And
It's funny
Yeah,
that
so
like you kind of mentioned like the art school I dropped out of art school. I'm not a good student. Um and the I think the year after uh yeah, I think it was the year after I left, they got a new teacher and he was the teacher from RISD who gave the assignment to Shepherd Ferry that then became like the whole Shepherd Ferry
the
brand.
obey,
The Obey,
yeah,
yeah. So I was like,
yeah.
oh, that would have been so cool. But
Yeah, that was the other school. I had applied for a couple of schools, and I applied for RISD, and most
mhm.
of my fellow peers went to RISD, and my teacher, her own son, not to get into the weeds of that too much, but her own son went to RISD, and so there was a RISD, and a bunch of my classmates were going to go to RISD, and it was going to be in Rhode Island, and I'd have to live in a dorm, and uh, it's really hard for me to even think about living with other people. And
Yeah.
Arts Center, I went out there. The average age of the student was 27 years old. There was no dormitory. You just had to live on your own in Pasadena, in Southern
Hmm.
California. So it was like there's really not a choice here. It's like Southern California for me. I'm not going
Southern,
to live with
let's see, can I
it.
go to Southern California where it's probably like
Yeah.
75 degrees all the time, or New England?
And living in my own apartment,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And
yeah.
I'm around, well, so that was just I don't know, what I wanted to do. I was I didn't obviously I grew up in Missouri, and as an art kind of a guy doing art in Missouri, it there wasn't a lot of peers to talk to. I talk a lot of
Hmm.
peers about pop culture and different things, a lot of interests that I had, but there wasn't really peers of mine that did art. I had really had to turn to like the local art fairs.
Yep.
My mom found an artist at the local art fair that was giving oil painting lessons. So that was like I just sat with like a bunch of senior citizens and like lonely housewives, and along with this, at the time he was probably in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, uh, doing art fairs. So he would, and that's later what I would do is
Yeah.
he would set up a booth, one of those white tents, and
Hmm.
it would be a juried show that he'd go to, and there's all sorts of different levels of art fair, and I can talk about that, but um, that's kind of like my first interaction of like somebody like really just doing art full time was like this guy Jim Todd. You can still find his website. He does these fantastic surrealistic chess oil paintings, and so they're like these surrealistic landscapes, but they're actually chess pieces that are playing. And he had a really good
Oh,
run
cool.
at doing the art shows in probably the 80s and 90s, probably more so the 90s, selling those artwork. But he's the one that first taught me to oil paint, and then he's the first person that I saw seriously making a living doing it, and it was just all on his own. He did it
Yeah.
all out of his own house. He was raising a family, and so like that kind of early impression of what an artist has to do, and the elements, because he had me assist him at times because he had this whole print business that he did, and he had me assist helping him like frame the prints and mat the
Yep.
prints, and because there was a lot of and the prints business in the 80s and 90s was a lot different than it is now. Like uh, for artists to do prints in the 80s and 90s, you actually had to go through this whole series of steps to actually, get transparencies done, lithographs made. So it's a very expensive, long, involved process to even
Yeah.
be able to sell these prints at the store. So I kind of got to see like what went into all of that as a teenager, and um, that just made a huge impression on me. It's like at any time, I could just pick up, load up my truck, and go out and be an artist.
Yeah. I mean
And
that
like it,
that's great for, especially from, because I mean I'm roughly the same age as you, and uh at that time you'd be like, oh, I want to be an artist, and they'd be like, well, why don't you become, why don't you get a real job, and then you can do that on the side or whatever, because it's just like no one, the internet didn't exist, no one really knew working on, it was hard, it's still hard to like make your way
it's
as an
ever
artist.
changing.
Yeah.
It's ever changing, and that advice is, uh, it's. I'll try to refrain from using too many explicit words, but it's such shitty advice.
Yeah.
You can fail at anything, and probably
Hmm.
one of the worst things to do is fail at something you didn't want to do at the first place.
Yeah.
And I've watched my daughter. I have a daughter, and she's 17, and I've watched kids who are incredibly artistic just totally be discouraged from going into art. And the thing that I realize by actually going out there and selling it direct to the public is being able to make something with your hands, out of your own head, out of blank raw materials. So few people can actually add value to anything that it's really scary and unknown for a lot of people to
Yeah.
like sit down in front of a blank canvas and say, oh, this thing I'm going to paint is ultimately going to make me X numbers of dollars.
Yeah.
It's too daunting of a task for most people to even conceptualize. And really,
It,
with an artist or any small business owner, it's the same
mhm.
thing of just there's a whole system set up to educate us and to put us behind desks and
Yep.
to be obedient workers that listen to instruction. And to become an artist, you really have to kind of see past that and be like, well, yeah, I could sit at your desk and do what you want me to do, and you can use my creativity and drain me for my entire life, and I can get a check for that. But I could make a lot more money if I just believe in myself and understand the economics of what my two hands can create. And I think uh, it it's such a complex struggle and journey, and it changes, the game changes. I left college as an editorial illustrator, and like I walked out like, oh, I'm gonna go in and talk to Entertainment Weekly and Wall Street Journal and da da da
Yep.
da da, go to Madison Avenue and get an art rep, and all of that just crumbled as I was doing it in real
Yeah.
time. Like the
Yeah.
dot-com crash happened as I got out of school,
Yeah.
and but I found work as a a toy designer at that point. I'd used my experience from when I was in college, and instead of just being this independent person, I went and I was a really horrible employee at a bunch of jobs for like a three
Yeah.
year stint. But where I learned, I treated the jobs. Uh, uh, I had a coworker once tell me that it's really difficult to work with you but I really admired working with you because you just always worked like you didn't care if you were going to get fired. So your projects always kind of went forward, and but everybody hated you, and you just didn't care. And I I was at companies where I was hired to kind of like draw at first or
Mhm.
manage projects going like at first it was at McFarlane it was to draw the figures and
What
um,
lines were you working on when you were at McFarland? I had a acquaintance
it was all the
working
things
on
that
the
my boss
dragons, I
didn't.
think.
Yeah, it was before that. So it was. I think I came on at the last Spawn line that they had. I think it was like Spawn 21 when he had the chair thing, and then there was like Dragon Spawn. But okay,
Yeah.
Matrix 1 figures came out. I
Oh,
did the
okay.
T3
Yeah.
figures. There was a whole line of nobody wanted in the company wanted to do NASCAR figures, and so like basically the first three waves of NASCAR figures were mine. The first all the first illustrations that were ever done before uh they started just choosing sports images to create the
Yeah.
sports figures. But the images that were done to kind of sell the original Sports Picks figures, I did those. But it it it's definitely a group process
Hmm.
at McFarland. So um, and it's not like one person is in charge of anything. It's almost
Yeah.
like everybody believes that at the time, I don't know how the company is set up now, but at the time, the McFarlane Toys was set up in New Jersey and Todd was out in Arizona. So they're like this. It kind of went through all the sculptures went through this Darwinian process in the office of like every artist wanting to put their imprint on it and make it
Hmm.
better. So the sculptures and ideas, sometimes really got good or like really went off the course. So
Yeah.
I kind of tried to position myself where I did the drawings that I could at the beginning to design it. And then I would see the toy production that came in at the end when we were doing test shots. And I started interacting with Chinese factories more. And that's my job when I went on to another company called Master Replicas. My job became
Sure.
more interacting with the factories
Yeah.
and making the products like that was a prop replica company,
Hmm.
collectible company. And so it was like going on these excursions to figure out how to make this thing or that thing. So I made swords and helmets in the foothills of the Himalayas in India. I went into China to do uh, all sorts of manufacturing. We did plexiglass stuff. We did resin casting. I saw all the McFarlane toy action figure manufacturers and got to understand the Chinese factory system in
Yeah.
Dongguan too. And uh, yeah, I'll fast forward through that. I was there
I'll
for a
fast
bunch of
forward through
years.
the spot where I made swords in the Himalayas.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. I
I
mean,
could
that's
go into hours on that. I mean,
yeah.
because it was like it was fun. That was a really cool job, and I got to the point where I was creative director there, and I was working with all the licensors, and um, so that's why I'm trying to fast forward to like kind of like there's a lot of I don't know palace intrigue, I guess that I could talk about, but it's probably boring
Yeah.
to the general public. So it's more just like my position there kind of exposed me to the how the sausage was made
Sure. Yeah.
for the characters going back to my teenage years. And not only did I get to work with McFarlane, so I kind of understand of like meeting your heroes and not just meeting your heroes, like working for him for 3 years. And
Yeah.
never meet your heroes, and I never definitely don't work for your heroes too, I would say. But I do admire a lot about what McFarlane did and has done. It's just like I saw how the sausage was made, so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not as magical to me anymore as it once was. And then working with the licensors, it became like how strategic they are to implant these characters in your mind in a subconscious way, and year after year, like get you ready for like oh I've like Disney had a whole program of release schedule. And, they see it in a different light than maybe I saw it. And Um, I they see it as strategically thinking about, their properties and the yearly anniversaries of their properties and how
Yep.
to like maybe take away too much exposure of these properties and
Hmm.
then kind of bring it back when the public wants it
Yeah.
to extract money, and not only extract money but then also gain other licenses. So at the time when I was working and I for Master Replicas, the entire company was working on Star Wars, and I was kind of standing on this island alone with for like the Disney license. They were like, the company was struggling, and the whole company needed to put all hands on deck for Revenge of the Sith and make a lot of money on
Yeah.
that release with the product that we had. But they also needed to invest in this license that we were going to have in the future, which was the Disney license.
Yeah.
And so I was like the guy kind of like keeping that thing open, as everybody else focused on, but interacting with Disney. Um, they are just very strategic in how they look at their current properties, or at least at the time. I don't know what they do now. It's a totally different structure now, probably, but um, at the time, they would look at their properties very strategically and strategically release them and strategically bring them back. And they were also looking at anything that had a licensed character. So they were looking at the Muppets at that point. They were looking at Star Wars. They were looking at buying Indiana Jones and taking on all these properties, but they hadn't quite done it yet. And so I was there when they took on when they bought the Henson
Hmm.
properties, and
Yeah.
then I recommended, oh, we should do photo puppet replicas. And so I really got to see how the Jim Henson studio worked, and we made
Oh, that's
three
amazing.
replicas of the photo puppets
Yeah.
that they did, and we used actual out of work puppeteers too to actually build our prototypes. And I flew to China to um, actually get the first prototypes, like explain how the prototypes were built because the Henson stitch is kind of specific. Um, and so, you know, been working with Disney for a while, and
I'm a huge Muppet fan. Like, did that? Were you like super into that project, being like a kid of the '80s? Because like I'm a huge Muppet fan, and like that would just.
the Charlie Chaplin Studios.
Yep.
They took me to the Charlie Chaplin Studios on whatever La Brea Avenue with the Kermit with the top hat, and so that studio has so much history. Walked into a room, they showed me the Muppet archive, and all of the Muppets sitting there. I almost lost my shit. I mean, like you asked, it was hard to be an adult at
Yeah.
that moment, and even to this day, they had Big Bird on the table, and they were working on a Big Bird, and they were like, "Do you want one of the feathers?" And I just remember carrying this feather, and I still have it. I have it in this wooden box,
Oh,
and
I
it's
bet.
it's
Yeah.
like it's a piece of the Mayflower or something. I don't
Yeah.
know. It's
Oh, that
it's I
I'm
had so
such a
many
big
experience
Muppet
like
fan that for our episode 400, I actually had my kids interview me. And
uh,
the first question my youngest asked me was like, I have a super important question. Rank your top five favorite Muppets from the original show. Cause like I raised them on the Muppets too. And I was like, oh my God, that's such a hard question. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. Something about that show, man, like was such a big part of my life because it was Muppets and then Muppet Babies and the movies and sharing it with my kids and
yeah, I think just that Jim Henson, I mean, he just it leaves such a hole in the world that he died so young. It
yeah.
was kind of shocking when he did die, and how quickly and just that creativity was all taken away. And it's like the I've heard Jeff Koons talk about like generosity in art,
Hmm.
and kind of like, and when he talks about it, it seems a little fluffy, but at the same time, I kind of get it too. But I get it more in terms of what Jim Henson was doing. he was very generous to put himself out there in that way, in a completely unknown way to an audience, and do it in such a sincere way, and not interacting necessarily with adults all the time, but including kids in that conversation too,
Yeah.
and finding that important, and just the fun. And you could tell he was probably just a fun guy to hang out with. Like,
Hmm.
he just probably made the movie sets just like more just like, I just want to hang out and sing with my friends, is
Right.
kind of,
Yeah.
I think I heard that from him as a quote at one point. So like, I didn't get to see, I didn't get to meet him,
Yeah.
but I did get to meet Heather Henson. She came to one of the Comic Cons, and I have a photo of her with my first prototype of the puppet. That, not my Terry Angus was the guy who created our, and he worked on Fraggle Rock, and he did our
Hmm.
first prototype puppet on that. And so I have a photo of her with it, and she loved it. But then, I guess the story arc of, like, I left Master Replicas, something about getting a windfall of $50 million caused the CEO at the time to lose his mind. And at one point during my tenure there, I was talking to the head of licensing, consumer products. It was the head of, sorry, it was a VP of consumer products for Disney. And she was, like, basically in charge of Disney catalog, and all of Disney consumer licensing. I don't think she oversaw the parks, but she interacted with another person that was another parks person. And I said, uh, I have a problem. We've made this. We were one of the first collectible. Well, we were the only collectible license that did that. Uh, Licensed with Pirates of the Caribbean, and
Hmm.
basically, the it was a Pirates of the Caribbean coin that we made that was pretty successful, and it started getting bootlegged on eBay. And I said,
Oh yeah.
hey, can you take this coin and kind of shut down some of these eBay sites that are taking our product and kind of bootlegging it? And because my boss was asking me to, like, what, like, he was adding up the dollar amounts of what's being bootlegged on eBay, and he thought that it was within our license to be protected by Disney. And so we went to Disney to protect us, and Disney came back and said, like, no, like, we Disney doesn't go after individual artists. It sets up an automatic David and Goliath scenario
Right.
where we are Goliath and they are David, and we will make an unknown, hardly valuable artist instantly beloved nationwide.
Oh, right, right,
And
right.
so
So
what
instead
you
that
need to
person
think
selling like
about,
20, they're gonna sell like 400.
mhm,
Yeah.
yeah, and become a beloved American artist at the same
Yeah.
time, like, in the public eyes,
Hmm.
And so, I understood that, and it was just like, oh, and she was like, she was teaching me at this point as a mentor. She goes, what you need to do as a product developer is learn how to bring your costs down to get rid of those people and outsell them. And she goes, we actually use conventions to source art ideas. And so, she kind of explained why there's fan art at Comic Cons to me at that point, and why Disney allows it. And so I really haven't talked about that, but I know that's one of the questions that most people ask me about right
Yeah.
off the bat, is like, how do you get away with painting all these paintings and selling all these,
I
like,
spent
paintings?
several years selling fan art at cons, and that was
Yeah.
always people would be like, "Oh, do you work for this company? Do you work for that company?" And be like, "No." And be like, "And then
Mhm.
neither do all these other people here," and it was
No,
that just that
no.
was
And
the yeah.
there's a bunch of lawyers that will tell you otherwise, but um, I have a thesis for every. I mean, you've come into contact with me through the pop culture stuff, so
Yeah.
I create bodies of work, um, and I do it over a time period, but I kind of have a thesis that I do it under. And the splatter art that I did specifically for Comic Con, it that was what took off,
Yeah.
and I'm known for. But it was started off as almost like a joke. where I had more pop surrealistic type paintings where I was doing Alice in Wonderland and trying to do more pop surrealism
Oh yeah,
along
yeah,
the
yeah.
lines of
I saw the like your Cheshire Cat's really cool, and yeah, yeah, I
yeah.
know what ones you're talking about.
Yeah, that came more from like that was the late stages of what I had started off with that was like more pop surrealism and based. And that's kind of like what I was doing on the side as I was at different toy companies. But then when I had I like to fit the style to or the idea of what I'm painting and kind of do something transformative to it. I mean, and
Hmm.
that's literally in the definition of a fair use and how editorial illustrators can draw people
Yeah.
in Entertainment Weekly and not get sued personally for copyright infringement. And you have to add some level of transformation to it. And that's really been decided since Andy Warhol because there was this whole in the whatever 60s or 70s this
Yep.
whole question of like whether Warhol was going to get sued by Campbell and legally they were looking at that whether they could sue and um, under the law and really it came down to they understood that Andy Warhol was bringing beloved brand awareness to their
Right.
product
Yeah.
and it was marketing that was positive. And so when you see Disney act, it's usually when something is severely negative. And even in that case, like I think there was a documentary like Death at the Mouseketeer Park or something. A lot of times if it's negative, they just let their fans tear it apart. You know,
Yeah.
because there's so many fans that I mean are just, Disney uh just
Fanatical.
fanatics. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean
Yeah.
the true sense of a fan. That this negativity, this unjustified negativity
Yep.
towards Disney previously gets like kind of worked out of the system. Um, it's funny though. I hesitate when I talk about Disney now too because probably about I did that run of like pop culture thesis
Hmm.
for from about 2011 is when I did my first comic book show to about 2016 is when I started exiting them. And I did maybe till 2019 some more drawings. And then I came back maybe in the pandemic for a brief period and I just did a sequence during of pop culture stuff during the pandemic. But then during the pandemic, I started realizing that pop culture was getting and Disney and all these companies were getting just heavily involved in current politics in the way that
Yeah.
I just I didn't one of the things I loved about the whole world I was in for like from my teenage year to the toy design to doing the pop culture art is that uh, it translated pop culture was a kind of beyond this conversation between left and right, and I'm wearing a red hat and or blue hair and all that stuff. And not to say that there weren't allegories of political messaging or moral messaging in movies, but I could go to Salt Lake City, show my artwork, and I would find people very friendly and open to it. I could go to Dallas, Texas, find people very open and accepting of it. I could go to Chicago, inner city Chicago, and find people, and there would never be a political conversation. Some
Yeah.
throughout.
I don't think I ever had a political conversation at a Comic Con ever. And I mean, you would get heated debates, but it was over like dumb pop culture, who can lift
Yeah,
Thor's hammer kind of stuff. But it was, yeah, it was. They were, but it's so funny
I
because
just
like,
recently
yeah,
put up because Deadpool and I was gonna I the Barbie movie was coming out and I had done a lot of work kind of to concept artwork to do my thought and
yeah,
of paintings and stuff that I wanted to see when the Barbie movie released. I mean, to me, Mattel has such a huge history. The Barbie toy itself has such a huge history, and then it became like well, if you like this movie, you're this. And I'm like this is just a thing that's in pop culture, and now
Yeah.
it's taken on this new identity. And then now I have to think about being a political illustrator within what I was doing. And so if I truly want to be a political illustrator, and that's the only avenue that's left open, then I have a body of work that I call these my dystopic selfies that are more based upon my view of our narcissistic self-reflection. And
Yeah.
so if I have to be a political artist, I'm going to take those paintings to galleries. And that's it's kind of convenient that you're talking to me right now because it gives me the opportunity to explain this like transition that I've been going through over the last few years of like just trying to even the last year I've like heavily like researched and involved myself with archaeologists to just because I like the stories
Hmm.
and learning all the names and all the environments and the worlds that pop culture brings. And but I'm tired of it uh, being not based on real things.
Yeah.
Like having to like I had to sit down and learn Game of Thrones, and I was just kind of like, I don't want to learn all these names. I don't want to learn the inside jokes. It's a good program, but it's just like,
It, it's one of those things.
I'm at an age.
Yeah, every time they came out with a new series, I had to go or season, I had to go back and watch the last season because I'm like, who are these people? Why are they mad at this guy again? Like, there was just so many people. I'm like, I can't keep them straight. And
Well, and it's world building, and I love that kind of world building and imagination and storytelling. I think they went off the rails with that series, but it's and but I when I had to like think about the future of pop culture and what I'm interested in, like drawing and painting, like now, everything that I think about is from my childhood, from the '80s, and it's like I've gone through so much of that catalog through this. Uh, I, I my my splatter art. The thesis behind that was to really how could I break apart the characters to where they're almost abstract expressionism. So,
Mhm.
like, how much of the character do I need to show? And I think the first drawings that I did are the strongest. And I just numbered them, kind of like Rothko numbered his paintings.
Yeah.
And so I just went one, two, three. And at first I did Rorschach green, Rorschach blue, but then the colors started overlapping. That I had too many characters because the thing started getting popular. And so the thesis was just how little information do you need to know that's a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle? How little do you need to know that that's Spider-Man? And not only how little information is there, am I going to be able to sell better than comic book artists around me that put hours and hours and hours into their work?
Yeah.
So it was almost like a challenge, an artistic challenge of will abstract expressionism translate to a comic book audience? And I had been doing like from 2007 to 2011, I
Yeah.
had been doing art fairs exclusively. So like I wasn't part of a pop culture world, but I was selling pop surrealism at art fairs. And then I went to comic cons and I just jumped worlds with the same type of booth, but then I presented it really as high-end abstract expressionistic art in a booth. And it was wildly popular from like 2011 to 2016. Like 2013 I got on Reddit, like the front page of Reddit, and that just
Oh
like
wow.
sent me out to a ton of new fans at that point. My like from 2013 to 2016, Instagram was just like pouring gasoline on fire for me.
Yeah.
If you could invest in promoting posts there, and that whole dynamic is now gone. Like the whole dynamic of what the zeitgeist of the American public being obsessed with superheroes in pop culture, the the whole dynamic of social media marketing and growth for artists. That dynamic has really shifted.
Hmm.
It's gone from like the only equivalent that I could really be explain is like the difference between having silent films and talkie films. It's
Yeah.
really that big of a leap. And a lot of people can't make that jump, just like a lot of people can't make that jump back in the silent film to like once they started talking, it just didn't translate in film at that point. And so it's a struggle. And you get these layers of new technology that keep on coming out too and changing the game. Like NFTs started changing art there for a bit, and then
Yeah, I
now
remember
it's
that.
it's
Yeah.
AI changing
Yep.
art for a bit. But so it's it's constantly for me evolving, and it's constantly changing for me, and finding the areas where you can make art too. Uh,
Do you I feel like we're very much poised for the next social media or the next YouTube or like the next big thing to come along because it just seems like people are over it, say what you want. Like Facebook has to run itself like a business, and
mhm.
like we've been running into huge issues with them, and we just solved it the other like 2 days ago, and it was because like if you post a link in your post, they bury your post, which had no idea that was and I
Well,
put
that
it
that rule keeps on changing because that's not the way it used to be. So
yeah.
it's you're shooting at a moving target all the
Oh
time.
yeah. I say it's like dating. I'm dating Facebook, and it's just walking
Yeah.
around behind Facebook, being like, "Why are you mad? Just tell me why you're mad," you know. And
Yeah.
it's brutal, you know.
Well, yeah, and there's a whole dynamic too of just what painting for social media, like that, like it's hard to get out of your mind enough to say like, hey, I'm not painting for the social media reaction. I'm
Hmm.
painting because I have ideas, and so uh, uh, it's hard to um, uh, get that customer out of the mind. If your business has been over the last 10 years kind of buying into the promotional positivity of
Hmm.
what the Facebook and Instagram can give you. So, like I don't know. I think AI for me and like kind of really made it seem. And let me back up. So 2016, I had a guy come into my booth and he said, "Look, I built an app that runs on kind of like Photoshop filters, and I have an app now that can create any one of your splatter art paintings and using any photo." And he goes, "Do you want to like go in invest with me?" And I'm like, "No, absolutely not."
Yeah.
And he was just in such disbelief, and that I wouldn't want to partner with him because it would allow me to just multiply the amount of art that I could do by 1,000 times. And
Right.
I said, if anybody can take a picture now and create this specific style, like I am totally not interested in it anymore. Like I can
Yeah.
be known for it, but I'm not going to bake that cake until people just are sick of tasting it.
Hmm.
I'm not going to turn myself into a fucking Twinkie.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and people who aren't artists don't quite understand that mentality of like just commercialize yourself and 10x yourself, and it's like, no, I don't think of myself that way. And it's really the allegory of John Henry and the machine. And
Yeah.
I think AI presents that to artists right now very clearly. And to me, it's a morality play, the story of it. And just to go, I mean, John Henry was this folklore of a steel worker for the train, and so he would
Hmm.
drive the spikes. And there's a machine that's come along that can drive these spikes faster, and so he goes up against the machine, and he wins, but he dies
He dies trying.
trying to
Yeah.
go up against it. And there's a bunch of different ways you can take that story, but a couple of ways that it has been interpreted is that John Henry is typically portrayed as an African American. It's
Hmm.
about it's a story that's not it's telling you the dangers of subjugating yourself to unknown forces. It's you can think you're fighting a race. Like that's like and you're doing something and you're going to win in the end and it's going to be a positive and it's going to change the course of human events. But really all it's going to do is destroy you. And
Yeah.
yes, you as a human you will win, but it can destroy you in the process. And so it's it's supposed to be an allegory of teaching you not to subjugate yourself. Like don't race the machine. Like it's not positive to go up against a clear threat in
Yeah.
this way. And so I think there is a lot of hatred for AI right now. A lot of people trying to say, "Oh, it's not good. It's not going to be good. It's just awful. It's this, that, and the other." And it's it's the machine. It's there's already this has already been written,
Yeah.
like what's going to happen, and so I think more about it of like knowing that this is true as a creative. Where do I want to place myself? What can it do? Like like it absolutely has stolen all of human creativity. Like it, if you type into Wonder Studios or ChatGPT or Dolly Studios or any of these things, hey, give me an Eslinger art splatter comic book painting, and it will do a fair job of
Yeah.
coming up with an image that looks like one on my website. So, like, what does that mean for the future? Like, anybody can hit that level of creativity. And so for me to fight or be angry at it, it's not really going to do anything. All I can do is continue to create things with my hand that resonate with individual collectors and that I think are beyond what's on the internet currently.
Yeah.
So ChatGPT, AI, they're all derivative. They're all machine learning and algorithmic, whatever they call it, the database kind of uh,
It
processing.
scrapes
You need a
information, but
database.
yeah, like it
You
can't
need
come
a
up with a new
database,
idea. Yeah.
and artists are always chasing the new.
Yeah.
And so, what I think it does eliminate is laziness in artists to just like I said, bake the cake over and over again until it becomes a fucking Twinkie and nobody wants to like everybody just knows you for the Twinkie.
Right.
Everybody just wants to see the Twinkie, right? Salvador Dali, everybody he's has like 2 volumes worth of work, but if you had a Salvador Dali painting, what painting do you want? I want one of his
Persistence of
two
time.
time
Yeah. Yeah.
clocks. He only
Yeah.
painted timepieces twice in
Yeah.
his entire life, and but the Twinkie that he created was a clock, and he didn't twink that thing out. He's like he did other artwork.
Yeah.
He did other things, and I think that's
Like
where
I
creativity.
totally get what you're saying, and I can wrap this back to the comic book show world. Is I was in the fan art alley and I had the stuff that I like to do, and I was at a show that Malcolm McDowell was at, and I thought it would be funny to draw Charlie Brown as if he was in the Clockwork Orange. I'm like, that's funny,
Yeah.
and I sold a ton of them. And then like the next show, my buddy's like, "Oh, I can't remember who the headliner was for that one." But he's like, "Oh, you should do, them as a Peanuts character." I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And then it got just like one day I'm looking down and like everything on my table is like some variation of the Peanuts. And I drew a Predator for a friend of mine, and someone's like, "Who drew this?" I'm like, "I did." And they're like, "That's not your style." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he's like, "Well, it's not a Peanuts character." I'm like, "I don't do that." All it was just like, and then I'm like, "Why am I doing this?" And that's kind of like, I was making Twinkies, and I was just like, "Why am I doing this?" And I just kind of lost the
Yeah,
interest.
I think the longevity comes from I, I've just I've had so many parts to my career too,
Hmm.
and they kind of blow up in these little 3 to 4 year increments. So I'm, and it's I've just seen because I've been attached to the entertainment industry with toys and collectibles, and then I had kind of like pop culture as a theme, but even going back to baseball cards, it's like baseball card collecting kind of became comic book collecting, kind of became action figure collecting, kind of became fan art collecting. And
Hmm.
so you're really selling to the same types of people throughout their lives at different levels in their lives. So a lot of the people I was selling fan art to were probably in the same level of customer I was selling to when I was selling, baseball cards or
Yep.
when I was making action figures. It's just I followed those people of like my generation interests of the things that kind of I've immersed myself in and liked from my childhood. And it really has been a really pleasant narrative, I would say up until recently. And then up until recently, and I would say, like you, I feel like the zeitgeist, this American kind of like cloud that kind of like hangs over our head, that kind of like uh, it's just it's really like all pervasive. We're all marinating in culture right now. We're all marinating in what the media is showing us, what the internet's showing us, and that kind of creates a different feel in society over time. And the interests of the general population kind of shifts and changes over time. And I do feel
Hmm.
like we're in a huge zeitgeist. We're in a change right now, and we're in a huge technological change right now. And to me, I love the nature of materials. That was one of my first classes in college. And one of the reasons why you have that class is because a lot of people get stuck in one medium. And especially when they go into college, they're like, I'm already a great oil painter. I'm already a great drawer. And all I want to do is get better at drawing. And this class was designed to shake you up and
Yeah.
understand that art can be created across many different materials. And I think this is a time period where, like, yeah, a lot of people, it's the Warren Buffett. You kind of find out who's been swimming naked when the tide goes out. And so all the
Yeah.
artists that are act have a little less depth to them, AI comes in and they're naked at this point because they can be replicated by AI. But I think visual arts and creativity, and definitely the new in painting is always something that hasn't been seen. And
Hmm.
you can say I've heard about the death of art my entire, like I was born into the death of art. Like
Right.
there's no reason to do a painting. Everything that's ever been painted has ever been painted. And it's like, no, it hasn't. And if you go to the galleries, if you are a true art connoisseur, if you do find the radical thinkers, you will see what's new. And for me right now, I'm just really fascinated with uh, the glitching of what these computer programs do, how they do the images wrong. And it's almost like if I was studying ancient Andean culture, I would
Yeah.
be looking for the symbols over and over again because they're visual. They didn't have any written language. They only had visual paintings and pots. So you kind of understand what they think by the visual symbols. Like you can't really understand what a computer thinks when it's coming up with a painting, but you can see where it breaks apart in the glitches. So to me, the glitches of computer imagery right now are fascinating to me. And that terminology is a space age terminology. It was like first like quoted in I think it was John Glenn's book, but it was one of the astronauts who wrote a book, and they were explaining what a computer glitch was to
Yeah.
and what they because they observed it for the first time in space dealing with
Yeah.
voltage changes, and it was just unexplained voltage changes. And so these unexplained glitches in computers just fascinate me. And there's a whole group of artists right now that aren't too popular just yet, but they're called there's one guy that's calling him the disrupted realism, yeah, the disrupted realism. So, but to me, it's glitch art right now.
Yeah.
Is
Oh, that's
what's
interesting.
fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, it's one of those, the AI art can be very deceptive until you go, oh, wait, that whatever that particular glitch, that I've seen a lot of like kind of these AI animations on TikTok, and you're like, well, their hand keeps moving through the thing they're holding,
Yeah.
and or they're like, one of them's like, I remember one of them was holding a gun shooting kind of like off in the distance, and I'm like, no human being would hold a gun that way. Like it's not,
Yeah.
it's the most
It,
impractical
the
way. Yeah.
the errors and the farts and stuff that happen. I don't really believe the whole Marcel Duchamp kind of like ready-made thing where you take a urinal out of context and it's
Yeah.
transformative because you put it in a gallery and that becomes I think yeah, I mean Marcel Duchamp was a great intellectual thinker, and I do believe those qualify as artwork and stuff, but I'm not really into making ready-mades myself. And I really feel like AI art is really kind of ready-mades.
Yep. Yeah.
And so as much as I would look at AI stuff, I wouldn't necessarily present anything as AI art myself. It's I really have to do something to that. And right now, more than just like working on a computer and trying to get glitches to happen in Photoshop or different programs, I'm trying to replicate that in Paint. Or drawing and using traditional medium to try to replicate what these glitches are, and that's been fascinating. It definitely not as popular as my pop culture splatter art stuff, but like I said, I kind of like working these different theses over
Yeah.
time. That it's like it's hard for me to, even though I might have an audience screaming for this character or that character or something. It's like, yeah, I presented that thesis already.
Right. Right. I'm kind of down
The
with it.
ones that meant something to me are in
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah. Cool, man. Where can our listeners go to check out your work and new stuff you have coming out? And
yeah, my website's kevineslinger.com. I have a YouTube channel where I do like 3D visualizations, Eslinger-art. Instagram's Eslinger-art. It's Eslinger. I do have a show coming up this Saturday at Giant Robot in LA.
oh, cool.
They have the Post-it show and a Post-it note show, and I have 9 Post-it notes at that show.
Oh,
And
awesome.
that'll be presenting more of my kind of glitch art drawings and
Yeah.
kind of what I've been doing over the last like, year or so.
Oh, very cool. I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to talk. It's been a lot of fun. I'm sorry I screwed up the time zone.
Not a problem.
Yeah.
Not a
And
problem.
I
I
feel like
really
we
love your
just
show.
yeah, I feel like we just
Yeah.
scratched the surface. You'll have to come back on and we can talk more.
Yeah, I loved it. Thanks.
Awesome.
Sorry if I
Thank you.
droned on too long.
Oh
But
no,
I guess
no.
that's what I'm here to do.
That's what the podcast is for. Yeah. So
Yeah.
listeners, we'll catch you guys again next week. And Kevin, thank you again so much for your time.
I'll talk to you soon.
And thanks for checking out the show today, listeners. If you enjoyed the content today, you can go over to patreon.com/Inebri-art to support the show. You can join over there for just a few dollars a month and help us provide this fun content that you just checked out. You can also email us at Inebri-art.com with your questions, complaints, and concerns, or you can find us on all social medias at Inebri-art or at Inebri-art6 on Instagram. And also don't forget to check out our other shows, Bar Talk Podcast, Old Colony Cast, Inebri-art, and all the other shows on the Inebri-art Network, which you can find at Inebri-art.com. Thanks again for listening.